April 14th, 1912. The North Atlantic Ocean was unusually calm. There was almost no wind. The water looked like polished black glass. Above, millions of stars filled the night sky. To everyone aboard the RMS Titanic, it seemed like the perfect evening. Couples walked the decks, musicians entertained guests, children slept peacefully in their cabins. Crew members continued their nightly routines. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. But beneath the surface of that calm ocean, history was about to change forever. In just a few hours, the world's largest and most luxurious passenger ship would disappear beneath the Atlantic. More than 1,500 people would lose their lives, and a single question would be asked for more than a century. How could the unsinkable ship sink? Was it simply bad luck? Was the iceberg solely responsible, or had the disaster actually begun years before the Titanic ever left port? This is the true story of the Titanic. To understand why the Titanic sank, we first have to understand why it was built. At the beginning of the 20th century, crossing the Atlantic by ship wasn't simply transportation, it was business, it was prestige, it was power. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people traveled between Europe and America. Some were wealthy businessmen, others were tourists, many were immigrants, leaving everything behind in search of a better life. The companies that carried these passengers competed fiercely. The faster their ships, the larger their ships, the more luxurious their ships, the more passengers they attracted. Two companies dominated this competition, the Cunard Line and the White Star Line. In 1907, Cunard launched two revolutionary ships, Lusitania and Mauritania. They were incredibly fast and quickly captured the public's attention. White Star Line needed a response, but instead of building the fastest ship in the world, they decided to build something even more impressive, the largest, the most luxurious, the most comfortable passenger ship ever created. That decision would eventually lead to the birth of Titanic. Construction began in Belfast, Ireland. The project was unlike anything ever attempted. More than 15,000 workers spent over 2 years building the enormous vessel. The ship measured almost 269 meters long. It stood as tall as an 11-story building. Its engines generated more than 50,000 horsepower. Inside were restaurants, libraries, cafes, a swimming pool, electric elevators, and one of the most beautiful staircases ever installed aboard a ship. For wealthy passengers, traveling aboard Titanic wasn't simply transportation. It was an experience. The ship represented the very best of modern engineering. Newspapers called it a miracle of technology. Many believed ships had finally conquered the dangers of the sea, but that confidence created a dangerous illusion. You've probably heard people say that Titanic was advertised as unsinkable. Surprisingly, that's not entirely true. The White Star Line rarely used those exact words in official advertisements. However, because Titanic had 16 watertight compartments, many newspapers described it as practically impossible to sink. The public quickly transformed practically unsinkable into simply unsinkable. That myth would become one of history's greatest ironies. When Titanic departed Southampton on April 10, 1912. Over 2,200 people were aboard, but life on the ship depended entirely on how much money you had. First-class passengers experienced extraordinary luxury. They slept in lavish suites, dined beneath crystal chandeliers, ate meals prepared by world-class chefs, walked through elegant halls decorated with carved wood and expensive carpets. Some of the richest people on Earth were aboard, millionaires, industrialists, celebrities. Meanwhile, deep inside the lower decks, third-class passengers lived a very different life. Many were immigrants, families from Ireland, Norway, Sweden, Italy, and Eastern Europe. Most had sold nearly everything they owned. For them, America represented hope, a new beginning. Although their cabins were much smaller, many third-class passengers later described the accommodations as surprisingly comfortable compared to other ships of the era. Nobody imagined that the class they traveled in would later determine their chances of survival. Commanding Titanic was one of Britain's most respected sailors, Captain Edward Smith. He had spent decades at sea. He was known as calm, experienced, and trustworthy. This voyage was expected to be his final command before retirement. Passengers felt safe knowing Smith was in charge. No one questioned his decisions. No one imagined this would become the defining voyage of his life. As Titanic entered the North Atlantic, wireless operators began receiving messages from nearby ships. The messages all carried a similar warning: ice ahead. Large ice fields, dangerous icebergs. One warning, then another, then another. Several ships reported massive ice directly along Titanic's planned route. Some messages reached the bridge, others never did. One warning was even set aside while wireless operators focused on transmitting passenger telegrams. At the time, this didn't seem unusual. The weather was excellent. Visibility appeared clear. The sea remained calm. No one believed disaster was only hours away. But nature had created the perfect conditions for an accident. There was no moon that night. The calm ocean meant waves weren't breaking against icebergs, making them far more difficult to spot. And Titanic, one of the largest moving objects ever built by humans, continued forward at nearly full speed, straight toward the darkness. April 14th, 1912. Throughout the day, the Titanic continued west across the North Atlantic. Passengers laughed, children played on deck. The orchestra performed in the first-class lounge. Waiters served elaborate dinners. It felt like another ordinary evening, but below the surface, thousands of massive icebergs drifted silently through the shipping lanes. To most people, a calm ocean sounds like good news, but for sailors, it can be incredibly dangerous. Normally, waves crash against the base of an iceberg. Even in darkness, those white waves make the ice easier to spot. But on the night of April 14th, the Atlantic was almost perfectly still. The sea looked like black glass. There were no waves, no white foam, nothing to reveal the enormous blocks of ice floating ahead. The sky was clear, but there was another problem. There was no moon. The only light came from the stars. That made the horizon almost impossible to distinguish from the ocean itself. It was one of the worst possible nights to encounter ice. High above the deck, inside the ship's crow's nest, two lookouts scanned the darkness: Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee. For hours, they stared into the freezing night, watching, waiting, searching for danger. One detail has become famous over the years. The binoculars that were supposed to be in the crow's nest weren't there. A change in crew assignments before departure had accidentally left the key to the storage locker behind. As a result, the lookouts had to rely only on their eyes. Historians still debate whether binoculars would have changed anything. Some believe they might have spotted the iceberg earlier. Others argue that the dark conditions would have made little difference. But one thing is certain: every second mattered. Then, at exactly 11:40 p.m., Frederick Fleet saw something, a dark shape, directly ahead. At first, it looked like a shadow. Then, it became larger, much larger. He immediately rang the warning bell 3 times, the signal every sailor feared. Iceberg ahead. Fleet grabbed the telephone. Bridge. Iceberg, right ahead. The officers reacted instantly. First Officer William Murdoch gave 2 rapid commands: hard a starboard, full astern. Today, those commands sound confusing because of steering practices at the time. Hard a starboard actually turned the ship to the left. The massive liner slowly began changing course, but there was one problem. Titanic was enormous. It weighed more than 50,000 tons. Even with the rudder fully turned, it couldn't move quickly enough. The iceberg continued growing larger through the darkness. Then, less than 40 seconds after it had been spotted, it happened. Contrary to popular belief, the collision wasn't violent. Many passengers barely noticed it. Some described it as nothing more than a slight vibration. Others said it felt as though the ship had rolled over a rough patch of road. There was no giant explosion, no dramatic crash. Instead, the iceberg scraped along the starboard side of the ship. Underwater, steel plates bent inward. Rivets popped loose. Long, narrow openings formed below the waterline. Water immediately began rushing into the forward compartments. At first, nobody understood how serious the damage was. The ship looked perfectly fine. The lights were still on, the engines were still running, people continued talking, playing cards, reading books. Everything appeared normal. But below deck, the Atlantic Ocean was already winning. Captain Edward Smith hurried to inspect the damage. He met with the ship's chief designer, Thomas Andrews. Andrews understood Titanic better than anyone alive. Together, they examined reports from crew members, compartment after compartment. Water was pouring inside. 5 watertight compartments were flooding.
That single difference changed everything. Andrews performed the calculations. He checked them once, then again. His conclusion never changed. He turned toward Captain Smith. Quietly, he delivered words no captain ever wants to hear. The ship will sink. Smith reportedly stared in silence, then asked the only question that mattered. How long? The answer? Between 1 and 2 hours. Captain Smith immediately ordered distress signals to be prepared. The wireless operators began transmitting the new international distress call, CQD, later followed by the newer signal, SOS. Nearby ships received the messages. One vessel, the RMS Carpathia, responded immediately. Captain Arthur Rostron ordered full speed toward Titanic. But there was a problem. Carpathia was almost 60 miles away. Even at maximum speed, it would take hours to arrive. Titanic didn't have hours. Then came one of the greatest tragedies of the disaster. Titanic carried lifeboats, but not enough for everyone. There were only 20 lifeboats, enough for approximately 1,100 people. More than 1,000 people would have no place if evacuation became necessary. Why? The answer shocks many people. It wasn't because lifeboats were impossible to install. Titanic actually could have carried more. But maritime safety regulations at the time were outdated. They required far fewer lifeboats than the ship actually needed. The builders complied with the law. Unfortunately, the law itself was dangerously inadequate, and no one imagined they would ever need every lifeboat. Within minutes, that assumption would prove fatal. Then came one of the greatest tragedies of the disaster. Titanic carried lifeboats, but not enough for everyone. There were only 20 lifeboats, enough for approximately 1,100 people. More than 1,000 people would have no place if evacuation became necessary. Why? The answer shocks many people. It wasn't because lifeboats were impossible to install. Titanic actually could have carried more. But maritime safety regulations at the time were outdated. They required far fewer lifeboats than the ship actually needed. The builders complied with the law. Unfortunately, the law itself was dangerously inadequate. And no one imagined they would ever need every lifeboat. Within minutes, that assumption would prove fatal. Captain Smith finally gave the order. Prepare the lifeboats. Crew members rushed across the decks. Canvas covers were pulled away. Ropes were checked. Davits swung outward over the freezing Atlantic. But there was a problem. Nobody had ever evacuated a ship this size before. The crew had received only limited emergency training. Many officers believed the lifeboats were fragile. They feared lowering them with too many people inside. As a result, the very first lifeboats left the Titanic only partially full. One carried just 28 people. Another, 24. Some had room for more than 60. Nearly half the seats remained empty. those empty seats would later become one of the greatest tragedies of the night.
The order spread quickly. Women and children first. For some families, that meant immediate separation. Husbands kissed their wives goodbye. Parents tried to calm frightened children. Many passengers refused to board at first. Why would they? The Titanic looked perfectly stable. Its lights were still shining. The orchestra was still playing. The ship barely appeared to be sinking. Some believed climbing into a small wooden lifeboat in the middle of the Atlantic was far more dangerous than remaining aboard the world's largest ship. They couldn't imagine that within 2 hours, the ship itself would be gone.
While first-class passengers slowly made their way toward the boat deck, the situation below was becoming desperate. Water flooded boiler rooms. Engineers continued working to keep electricity flowing. They knew exactly what staying behind meant. If the lights failed, panic would spread instantly. So they remained at their posts, shoveling coal, monitoring steam pressure, keeping generators alive. They worked until seawater finally reached them. Many never escaped. Their sacrifice kept the lights burning almost until the very end.
One's theory has become legendary. As panic slowly grew, the ship's musicians gathered together. Instead of searching for safety, they continued playing. Their music echoed across the freezing night, helping calm frightened passengers, giving people hope. Exactly what they played during the final minutes remains uncertain. Some survivors believed it was the hymn "Nearer, My God, to Thee." Others remembered different songs. Whatever the truth, none of the musicians survived. Their final performance became one of the most enduring symbols of courage in history.
By 2 a.m., the bow of the Titanic had disappeared beneath the ocean. The stern rose higher and higher into the air. Furniture slid across rooms. Chandeliers crashed from ceilings. Inside the ship, people struggled simply to stand. The angle became steeper every minute. Then, the impossible happened. The enormous stresses placed on the hull became too much. With a deafening roar, the ship broke in two. For decades, people argued whether this had actually happened. Some survivors insisted it did. Others believed it remained intact. In 1985, when the wreck was finally discovered, the mystery was solved. The Titanic had indeed broken apart before reaching the ocean floor. The bow disappeared first. Moments later, the stern briefly settled back onto the water, before rising almost vertically into the air. Then, it too vanished beneath the Atlantic.
At approximately 2:20 a.m., the Titanic was gone. The largest passenger ship on Earth had disappeared beneath the surface. The ocean became strangely quiet. Then, the screaming began. More than 1,500 people were now in water measuring around -2 degrees Celsius, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold enough to kill within minutes. Many wore only light clothing. Life jackets could keep them afloat, but they couldn't keep them warm. Survivors in nearby lifeboats later described hearing hundreds of voices calling for help. Then, one by one, the voices faded, until eventually, there was only silence. It was a silence many survivors said haunted them for the rest of their lives.
Nearly 2 hours later, lights finally appeared on the horizon. The RMS Carpathia
had arrived. Its captain had pushed his ship to maximum speed through dangerous ice fields. Against incredible odds, Carpathia rescued more than 700 survivors. But for over 1,500 others, help had arrived too late. News of the disaster shocked the world. How could the greatest ship ever built disappear during its very first voyage? Investigations soon uncovered a series of failures. Too few lifeboats, ignored ice warnings, outdated safety regulations, overconfidence. Each mistake seemed small on its own. Together, they became catastrophic. The tragedy transformed maritime safety forever. New international rules required enough lifeboats for everyone. Continuous radio watches became mandatory, and the International Ice Patrol was created to monitor dangerous ice in the North Atlantic. The lessons written in the freezing waters of April 1912 continue protecting lives more than a century later.
The Titanic has often been remembered as a story about an iceberg. But the iceberg wasn't the whole story. The disaster was shaped by human decisions, confidence in technology, incomplete safety standards, communication failures, and the belief that the unthinkable simply couldn't happen. Today, the wreck of the Titanic rests nearly 3,800 meters below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, slowly being reclaimed by the sea. A silent memorial to the more than 1,500 men, women, and children who never reached New York. More than 100 years have passed, yet the Titanic continues to fascinate the world. Not because it was the biggest ship ever built, but because it reminds us of something far more important. No matter how advanced our technology becomes, nature always has the final word.